He was rejected by everyone, by classmates who mocked the way he spoke, by neighbors who dismissed him as strange, by teachers who overlooked him because they thought he was slow, by employers who turned him away at the door, by friends who never stayed long enough to really know him, and even by family who, though they loved him in their own way, carried the silent disappointment that he would never be the son they hoped for. And every rejection cut into him like a blade until his entire being was stitched together with scars invisible to the world, but deeply felt by him. And while most people would crumble under the weight of constant dismissal, he carried it in silence, waking up each morning with the dull ache of not being wanted, yet still rising, still pushing forward because something deep inside whispered that life had more to offer than this endless cycle of being told no, and that whisper was the only thing that kept him from giving up entirely, because though his body was tired and his spirit battered, that whisper reminded him that one day all of this might make sense, that pain was not the final chapter, but only the beginning of a story he had not yet lived. So he endured the lonely nights where the only voice he heard was his own, questioning if he was worthy of love, success, or even belonging. He endured the days where he walked through crowded streets feeling like a ghost, unseen and unheard. He endured the rejection letters, the doors slammed in his face, the laughter that followed his failed attempts, and each time he wanted to collapse under the weight of failure, he remembered that whisper telling him to stand back up. So he did, again and again, until standing back up became his only form of survival. And what people didn't see was that every rejection was quietly shaping him, chiseling away at his insecurities, sharpening his resilience, teaching him lessons he never asked to learn but would one day need. And though he didn't know it then, all of those moments that felt like endings were only preparing him for a beginning unlike anything he could imagine, because rejection, though bitter, was forging him into someone who would not break when his time finally came. And that time came on a day so ordinary that it almost slipped by unnoticed, a day that started like any other, with him waking up in a small, cluttered room, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if this was all his life would ever be, yet forcing himself to rise anyway, because even without reason, he believed in showing up, and that belief carried him to a small gathering he had been invited to speak at, not because anyone thought he was special, but because someone had canceled last minute and they needed to fill the slot. And as he stood backstage, clutching his notes with trembling hands, he wondered if this too would end in rejection, if people would laugh or ignore him, if he would once again walk away unseen. But something in his heart told him to let go of the fear, to speak not for applause or recognition, but because his story deserved to be heard. So when he stepped onto the stage and the room fell quiet, he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak, not with polished words or practiced charm, but with raw honesty that came from years of being silenced. And as he spoke about rejection, about pain, about what it felt like to be invisible yet still keep going, something shifted in the air. The audience that had come with low expectations leaned forward, eyes wide, hearts open, because they recognized themselves in his story. They too had known rejection, failure, loneliness, and for the first time they saw not just a man on stage, but a reflection of their own struggles. And when he finished speaking, the silence that followed was heavy, not because they were unimpressed, but because they were moved beyond words. And then came the applause, rising slowly at first, then swelling into something thunderous, something that shook him to his core, because for the first time in his life people weren't rejecting him, they were embracing him, seeing him, honoring him. And in that moment he realized that all the years of rejection had not been wasted, they had been preparing him for this single moment where his voice could touch lives. And from that day forward, everything changed. Opportunities he had once begged for began to find him. People who had ignored him now sought him out. Doors that had always been closed suddenly opened. And though his circumstances transformed, he never forgot the years of being unwanted, because those years taught him empathy, humility, and resilience. They taught him that rejection was not a curse but a teacher. And as he continued to rise, inspiring thousands with his story, he carried with him the memory of the boy who was once overlooked, the young man who was told he wasn't good enough, and the countless nights he spent alone, reminding himself that it was all worth it, because rejection was not the end of his journey, it was the soil in which his strength had grown. And so he stood as living proof that no matter how many times the world says no, you only need one moment, one yes, one chance to step into the light. And when that moment comes, all the pain, all the scars, all the years of doubt will not be wasted. They will be the very reason you are ready to rise and claim the life you were meant to live. Because in the end, he was never truly rejected. He was simply being prepared for the day when his story would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone who heard it.